There comes a moment when the conversations that once filled your days begin to feel strangely empty. You sit across from people you've known for years, listening to the same stories, the same complaints, the same endless cycles, and instead of feeling connected, you feel like you're watching a life you no longer belong to. The unsettling part is that nothing dramatic happened. No betrayal, no argument. Just a quiet distance that keeps growing, even when everyone is still standing right beside you. At first, you blame yourself. Maybe you've become too reserved, too serious. Maybe you're expecting too much from people who are simply trying to enjoy life. So you force yourself to participate. You laugh when everyone laughs. You answer messages you don't really want to answer. You show up because that's what loyal friends do. Yet every interaction leaves you more exhausted than before, as though each conversation demands you become a version of yourself you've already left behind. Most people assume this means something is wrong. They tell you that humans need constant connection, that isolation is dangerous, that if you no longer crave friendships, you're becoming cold, arrogant, or emotionally damaged. But what if the opposite is true? What if the growing silence inside you isn't a symptom of losing your humanity, but evidence that your inner world has begun changing faster than your outer one? From a Jungian perspective, there are moments when the psyche naturally withdraws energy from familiar relationships. Not because people have become worthless, but because the unconscious is redirecting your attention towards something it considers even more important. When this begins, the need for constant social confirmation quietly weakens. And without realizing it, you stop searching for people who reassure your identity, because your identity itself is beginning to transform. This transition is deeply misunderstood. Many people panic the moment they outgrow old friendships. They rush to replace them with new circles, new communities, new distractions, believing the emptiness must be filled immediately. Yet in doing so, they interrupt a psychological process that has accompanied profound inner transformation for generations. The rarest personalities often don't lose interest in friendship because they hate people. They lose interest because something within them is asking a question that ordinary conversation can no longer answer. Carl Jung devoted much of his work to understanding these quiet turning points in human development. His work suggests that individuation, the journey toward becoming psychologically whole, often begins when the voices outside become less compelling than the one emerging from within. That doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means your relationship with connection changes completely. And if you've been wondering why the people around you suddenly feel distant while you haven't gone anywhere, the answer may have far less to do with them than you ever imagined. The uncomfortable truth is that you may not be losing your friends at all. You may simply have outgrown the person who once needed them. There is a hidden assumption most people carry without ever questioning it. They believe friendships exist because two people enjoy each other's company. They assume that shared interests, memories, or personalities are what hold relationships together. But if that were entirely true, why do friendships that once felt unbreakable sometimes dissolve without a fight? Why can two people who genuinely care about each other slowly become strangers, even when neither has done anything wrong? From a Jungian perspective, relationships often form around psychological needs that remain invisible to us. Long before you consciously choose your friends, your unconscious is already making choices on your behalf. It seeks familiarity. It seeks emotional balance. Most importantly, it seeks people who reinforce the version of yourself you currently believe you are. Every friendship quietly supports an identity. Some make you feel competent. Others make you feel needed. Some remind you that you're the funny one, the responsible one, the helper, the listener, or the person everyone turns to when life becomes difficult. This is why losing interest in certain friendships can feel so confusing. On the surface, nothing has changed. Your friends are still the same people they've always been. Their personalities haven't shifted overnight. Their habits remain familiar. Yet every conversation feels strangely repetitive, as though you're reading the same chapter over and over while your own story has already moved into an entirely different book. The reason is rarely about intelligence or maturity. It runs much deeper than that. The identity those relationships once reflected is beginning to dissolve. The unconscious is quietly withdrawing its investment from an older version of you. And because that process happens beneath awareness, it doesn't arrive with clear explanations. It arrives as restlessness, as emotional distance, as the uncomfortable realization that the places where you once felt understood no longer feel like home. Most people resist this stage because they interpret it as selfishness. They tell themselves they should be grateful. They remind themselves how long these friendships have lasted. They convince themselves that loyalty means remaining exactly as they were. But psychological growth has never asked for comfort. It asks for honesty. And honesty sometimes reveals that you've been maintaining certain relationships not because they continue to nourish your life, but because they preserve an identity you've already outgrown. Jung's work suggests that individuation requires more than discovering who you are. It also requires allowing old psychological structures to lose their grip. This includes the roles you've unconsciously performed within your closest relationships. The caretaker, the peacemaker, the one who always says yes, the person who keeps everyone together at the expense of themselves. Those roles may once have protected you. They may even have been necessary. But eventually they begin to feel less like expressions of your character and more like costumes you forgot you were wearing. This creates an invisible tension. Your friends continue responding to the version of you they've always known, while something deeper inside insists that version no longer fits. They expect familiar reactions, familiar opinions, familiar emotional patterns. Yet every time you deliver them, you feel a little further away from yourself. That is why the rarest personality types often become quieter before they become freer. They stop speaking simply to maintain harmony. They stop sharing every thought just to avoid disappointing others. They begin observing instead of performing. And although this silence is often mistaken for withdrawal, something entirely different is happening beneath the surface. The unconscious is reorganizing your identity. And whenever that process begins, the need for relationships built around your old self starts fading on its own. Not because you no longer value friendship, but because you can no longer build your life around pretending to be someone you've already left behind. At first, you think you're simply becoming more selective. You tell yourself you've grown busier, that your priorities have changed, that adulthood naturally leaves less room for constant socializing. Those explanations sound reasonable, but eventually you notice something they cannot explain. It isn't just that you're spending less time with people. It's that you no longer feel the same emotional dependence on their presence. The silence that once felt uncomfortable begins to feel restorative. A free evening no longer feels like something that needs to be filled. And without realizing it, you stop measuring the quality of your life by the number of people in it. This is often the moment when others begin to misunderstand you. Friends may assume you're becoming distant, difficult, or emotionally unavailable. Some will tell you that you've changed, and in one sense, they're absolutely right. But what they rarely understand is that the change isn't happening because you've stopped caring. It's happening because your inner source of stability is slowly moving inward. The reassurance you once searched for in conversations, invitations, and constant contact is beginning to come from a place that no relationship can provide. From a Jungian perspective, this shift reflects a gradual movement away from the persona and toward the deeper center of the psyche. The persona depends heavily on social reflection. It asks, who am I in the eyes of other people? As long as that question dominates your life, relationships become mirrors you constantly need to consult. Every compliment strengthens your identity. Every rejection weakens it. Every friendship becomes, without your awareness, another source of psychological confirmation. But individuation begins to challenge this arrangement. Jung's work suggests that the more a person encounters the deeper layers of the self, the less they require constant external validation to maintain psychological balance. This doesn't eliminate the desire for meaningful relationships. Instead, it transforms the reason those relationships exist. You no longer seek people to complete your identity. You seek them because your identity no longer depends on being completed. That difference is enormous, even if it appears almost invisible from the outside. Many people never experience this transition because they become frightened the moment solitude stops feeling painful. Society often teaches that needing fewer people must be a warning sign, as though independence automatically leads to isolation. Yet psychological maturity points in another direction entirely. The healthiest forms of connection are rarely built from emotional dependence. They emerge when two individuals are capable of standing on their own while freely choosing to walk beside each other. This explains why certain friendships naturally lose their intensity as you continue growing. They were sustained by mutual needs that no longer exist. Perhaps you once bonded through shared insecurity, constant validation, or the comfort of familiar routines. Once those psychological foundations begin to dissolve, the relationship may continue with affection, but it can no longer occupy the same place in your life. That realization often brings guilt. You wonder whether you're abandoning people who have done nothing wrong. In reality, growth rarely asks you to judge others. It simply asks whether the life you're living still reflects the person you're becoming. The rarest personality types eventually understand something many spend years resisting. Being surrounded by people is not the same as feeling internally connected. There comes a point where one honest conversation becomes more valuable than 100 familiar ones, where genuine presence matters more than constant availability, and where solitude no longer feels like the absence of friendship. It begins to feel like the presence of yourself. There is a mistake almost everyone makes when they first notice themselves pulling away from old friendships. They assume the answer is to find better people, better conversations, better environments, better circles that finally match the person they're becoming. It feels like the obvious solution. If your current relationships no longer satisfy you, then surely new relationships will. But this search often becomes another distraction. Many people spend years replacing one social circle with another, believing each new group will finally provide the sense of belonging they've been missing. At first, everything feels exciting. New personalities, new ideas, new opportunities to reinvent themselves. Yet after enough time passes, the same quiet dissatisfaction begins to return. Different faces, different conversations, the same feeling that something essential is still absent. Why? Because the problem was never the people. From a Jungian perspective, the psyche often creates the illusion that fulfillment exists somewhere outside the present moment. It convinces you that one more relationship, one more community, one more person who finally understands you will resolve the restlessness you've been carrying. But as long as your sense of completeness depends on finding the perfect external mirror, the search never truly ends. Every new friendship eventually becomes another reflection that cannot sustain the weight of your inner expectations. This is one of the most uncomfortable stages of individuation because it dismantles one of our deepest assumptions, that belonging is something another person gives us. Jung's work suggests something far more demanding. Before you can genuinely belong with others, you must stop abandoning yourself. Otherwise, every relationship becomes an unconscious negotiation. You adapt your opinions to maintain harmony. You hide parts of yourself to remain accepted. You become increasingly skilled at preserving connection while slowly losing contact with your own inner life. Many lifelong friendships survive precisely because both people silently agree never to challenge the identities they've built together. As long as everyone continues playing the same psychological roles, the relationship feels stable. But the moment one person begins changing, the balance is disrupted. Conversations become awkward. Shared interests fade. Familiar jokes no longer carry the same meaning. Neither person is necessarily wrong. They're simply no longer participating in the same psychological story. This explains why growth can feel surprisingly lonely, even when you're surrounded by good people. The loneliness doesn't come from having fewer friends. It comes from standing between two identities. You've already outgrown the old version of yourself, but the new one hasn't fully emerged. During this transition, no external relationship can completely resolve the uncertainty because the transformation is taking place within your own psyche. Most people panic here. They rush to rebuild certainty. They force themselves back into familiar social patterns. They search desperately for people who make the discomfort disappear. Yet every attempt to escape this inner space only postpones the work the unconscious is inviting them to do. The rarest personality types gradually realize that this temporary loneliness is not a punishment. It is preparation. For the first time, they begin discovering which thoughts genuinely belong to them and which were borrowed from the expectations of everyone around them. They learn the difference between enjoying company and depending on it. They discover that silence is no longer something to survive, but something capable of revealing truths that constant conversation always kept hidden. And once that discovery takes root, something remarkable happens. You stop asking, "Who understands me?" You begin asking a far more transformative question. Am I finally becoming someone I understand myself? At some point, the silence stops feeling temporary. What once seemed like a passing phase gradually becomes your natural way of existing. You no longer reach for your phone every time something interesting happens. You no longer feel the urge to immediately share every victory, every disappointment, every new idea. Not because you've become secretive, but because something profound has changed. Your experiences no longer feel incomplete until someone else witnesses them. This is often the stage where people begin asking if something is wrong with you. Why don't you come around anymore? You used to be more social. You've changed. The question sounds simple, but underneath it lies an expectation that many people never recognize. They assume that psychological health always looks outward. They believe fulfillment naturally expresses itself through constant interaction, endless conversation, and the continuous exchange of emotional energy. When someone begins enjoying solitude more than stimulation, others often mistake peace for withdrawal. Yet Jung's work suggests that some of the most important transformations occur precisely when the psyche becomes less fascinated by external noise. From a Jungian perspective, individuation is not the process of becoming isolated. It is the process of becoming internally integrated. During this journey, energy that was once invested in maintaining appearances, seeking approval, and preserving familiar identities gradually returns to the deeper center of the personality. The unconscious is no longer asking, "How can I fit into the world?" It begins asking a far more difficult question. Who am I when no one is watching? Very few people remain with that question long enough to hear its answer. Most become uncomfortable almost immediately. They fill every quiet moment with entertainment, every uncertainty with distraction, every empty evening with activity, not because they genuinely desire constant stimulation, but because stillness has a way of exposing everything the persona has spent years hiding. The rarest personality types eventually stop running from that silence. They discover that solitude is not empty at all. It is crowded, with forgotten desires, neglected creativity, unresolved fears, buried memories, and unexplored possibilities. At first, this inner world feels overwhelming. Without the familiar rhythm of constant social interaction, the unconscious becomes impossible to ignore. Old emotional patterns surface. Long-forgotten questions return. Parts of yourself you abandoned years ago begin quietly asking to be recognized again. This is why genuine solitude can feel more emotionally demanding than any crowded room. You are no longer distracted by everyone else's expectations. You are finally meeting your own. The remarkable thing is that this encounter slowly changes the quality of every future relationship. You stop expecting friends to rescue you from boredom because your inner life has become genuinely interesting. You stop expecting them to regulate your emotions because you've learned to sit with your own. You stop expecting them to constantly reassure your worth because your sense of identity no longer depends on their reflection. Ironically, this makes you far more capable of authentic friendship than before. For the first time, you are no longer approaching people from psychological hunger. You are approaching them from wholeness. And there is an enormous difference between spending time with someone because you fear being alone and choosing their company because your life is already complete enough that every genuine connection becomes a gift rather than a necessity. That is the quiet transformation most people never notice. The rarest personality type doesn't stop needing friends because they stop loving people. They stop needing friends because they finally stop asking other people to provide what only their own integrated self can give. The greatest surprise comes after everything else has already changed. It is not the silence. It is not the smaller social circle. It is not even the realization that many friendships belong to an earlier version of your life. The greatest surprise is discovering that you still love people. You simply no longer need them in the way you once did. That distinction is so subtle that most people never notice it, yet it completely transforms the way relationships are experienced. For years, many friendships are built upon invisible exchanges. One person provides reassurance, another provides purpose. Someone makes you feel understood. Someone reminds you who you think you are. These exchanges are rarely conscious, but they quietly shape the emotional architecture of every relationship. This is why the loss of certain friendships can feel devastating. It is not only the person you miss, it is the version of yourself that only seemed to exist in their presence. From a Jungian perspective, individuation gradually loosens these unconscious attachments. As the personality becomes more integrated, the center of psychological gravity shifts away from external confirmation and toward the self. The result is not emotional detachment, but emotional freedom. You no longer require another person to constantly reassure your value, because that value is no longer being negotiated outside yourself. For the first time, your inner stability remains intact whether someone praises you, misunderstands you, stays close, or quietly walks away. This changes every relationship that survives the journey. Conversations become lighter because they are no longer carrying the burden of your identity. You stop expecting friends to rescue you from loneliness, validate every decision, or fill every moment of silence. You become capable of appreciating another person's presence without fearing their absence. That may sound like a small shift, but psychologically it changes everything. Fear quietly gives way to choice, and choice creates a kind of intimacy that dependency never could. Ironically, this is often when the deepest friendships finally become possible, not because you have found perfect people, but because you have stopped asking imperfect people to satisfy impossible emotional needs. You allow others to disagree without feeling rejected. You allow distance without assuming abandonment. You allow change without interpreting it as betrayal. The relationship no longer depends on preserving an old identity, because both people are free to continue becoming who they are. This is also why the rarest personality types often appear misunderstood from the outside. Those who have not experienced this transformation may mistake their calm for indifference or their independence for emotional distance. But beneath that quiet exterior is not a person who has stopped caring. It is someone who has discovered that genuine connection cannot be built upon fear of being alone. The more comfortable you become in your own company, the more honestly you can welcome someone else's. Perhaps that is the deepest paradox in Jung's work. The journey toward the self never asks you to reject human connection. It asks you to stop using human connection as a substitute for knowing yourself. Once that difference becomes real, friendships are no longer places where you search for completion. They become places where two complete individuals freely meet, not to escape themselves but to share who they have become. When that happens, you do not stop needing friends because your heart has closed. You stop needing them because the emptiness they once filled no longer exists. And from that moment forward, every relationship that remains is no longer sustained by unconscious necessity, but by something infinitely rarer: genuine choice. If you've recognized yourself throughout this journey, then perhaps you've been asking the wrong question all along. Perhaps the question was never, "Why don't I need friends anymore?" Perhaps the real question is, what part of me no longer needs to depend on them to feel complete? That realization can feel unsettling at first. Society teaches us that a full life should always look crowded, that happiness is measured by how many people surround us, how often our phones ring, or how many invitations fill our calendars. When those things begin to fade, it's easy to assume something precious is being lost. But sometimes what disappears is not your capacity for connection. It is your dependence on external confirmation. Throughout this journey, you've seen that the friendships leaving your life are not necessarily evidence that people have failed you. More often, they reveal that your inner world is changing. The identity those relationships once supported is gradually dissolving, making space for something more authentic to emerge. That process is rarely comfortable. It asks you to tolerate uncertainty, to sit with silence, and to release familiar roles before you fully understand who you are becoming. Yet this is precisely where Jung's work points us. The path toward individuation is not built by collecting more external validation. It is built by developing an inner center that remains stable even when life around you changes. This doesn't mean closing your heart or choosing isolation over intimacy. Quite the opposite. The person who no longer depends on friendship for emotional survival often becomes the person most capable of genuine friendship. They no longer love from fear. They no longer remain close simply to avoid loneliness. They no longer sacrifice authenticity to preserve acceptance. Instead, they meet others with openness, honesty, and freedom. They can appreciate someone's presence without fearing their absence because they have already found the one relationship that can never be taken away, the relationship with themselves. From a Jungian perspective, this is not the end of the journey. It is only the beginning. Once you stop searching outside yourself for the missing piece, the unconscious begins revealing deeper layers of who you are. New questions emerge, new patterns become visible, and the life you build starts reflecting your true nature, rather than the expectations you once carried without realizing it. If today's reflection resonated with you, then the next step in this journey becomes even more important. Because outgrowing people is only one part of psychological transformation. The deeper challenge is understanding what happens when you finally stop living through the persona you've spent years protecting and begin meeting the hidden parts of yourself waiting beyond it. That is exactly what we'll explore in the next video appearing on your screen. If something inside you has been quietly changing, you won't want to stop here. The next step may explain why the person you're becoming sometimes feels unfamiliar, and why that feeling is not something to fear, but one of the strongest signs that your real journey has finally begun.